Welcome, welcome, welcome. Super glad to have you joining us here tonight, and also welcome to those of you who are joining us from a distance. I know we have at least one viewing party in Homer, and I think there are people elsewhere who are also participating with us. Later when we get to the Q&A, we'll get you an email address so you can participate in the Q&A as well, folks at a distance. I am Libby Roderick. I'm the director of the Difficult Dialogues Initiative here and also the chair of the Books of the Year program. We are hosting this event tonight with the generous support of the Alaska Forum on the Environment. Anybody here attending that conference? It's a week-long conference here in the state. And tomorrow is free, so if you have any interest in attending a statewide environmental conference down at the Denina Center tomorrow, you can go for no charge, which is a pretty wonderful opportunity. I would like to start tonight by honoring the fact that we are gathering on the traditional, sacred, and unceded lands of the Denina people. And they have been with us stewarding these lands and waters and wildlife for thousands of years. I got permission from Aaron Leggett, who is the president of the Native Village of Eklutna, for us to have this gathering here tonight, and we are grateful for that. And wanting to just say, as we go forward with addressing solutions and responses to all the threats we suffer right now to the possibility of a future for life on Earth, that we wish to go forward with justice and equity at the center of all of the things that we do. The Books of the Year program is part of a bigger Difficult Dialogues initiative. It's a joint effort of UAA and APU. And every few years, we select a theme that lasts for a couple of years, and then we pick books underneath that theme to help us launch conversations about challenging topics. For the next year and a half, the theme that we are working with is called Building Resilient Communities. And this book, the book that many of you know about because you came to this talk tonight, it's called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, is one of our Books of the Year. It has 100, I think, evidence-based solutions to the climate crisis that would not only sort of stop what's been going on, but actually, if brought up to scale, would reverse global warming. And our guest speaker tonight is the editor of this book, who worked with a team of scientists and experts around the world to identify these practices and processes. And he also oversees Project Drawdown, which models the scaling of these technological, social, and ecological solutions to the climate crisis. The most common question I get, and I'm sure those of you who work in any way educating about the climate emergency get this question all the time. The most common question I hear after these kinds of presentations is, what can I do, right? Or what can we do? And Paul Hawken's work is kind of a robust response to that question, giving us an amazing array of possibilities for our future. We have tons of copies of this book in the library here at UAA and APU's library, and so please feel free to check them out. Paul's also willing to sign books at the end of this presentation. We have the Writer's Block bookstore has come and is downstairs and willing to sell books as long as they last after this is over. So please check that out. So we will have a question and answer session after he is done. I want to thank Scott Gruen, who is live streaming to our distant participants, and also he is recording this, and with Paul's approval later, it will probably be rebroadcast on Addressing Alaskans on KSKA later on, so you can look forward to that. Thanks to Chelsea Ward-Waller and to Pierce Schwab for escorting Paul today, and to Luis Chavez, who has been an amazing assistant to me in a multitude of ways to help this happen. And to the staff here at the Wendy Williamson Auditorium. As many of you know, the university is in interesting times, and so I really appreciate the efforts of the folks who have helped this happen. So let me say a few more words about Paul. Paul Hawken works with heads of state and corporations on economic development and industrial ecology and environmental policy. He's been working in this field for decades. He's the author of several internationally best-selling books, including Growing a Business, The Ecology of Commerce, which was voted the best textbook for environment and business combined concerns by business professors around the United States. And he's also the author, among others, of Blessed Unrest, which one of the reviews about it said it was a different kind of book. It's the story of good in the world. And it documents the social movements all around the world as people are, and I am quoting now, humanity's immune response to toxins like political corruption, economic disease, and ecological degradation. And I was just chatting with a student out in the lobby before this, and she said, I'm in love with this book. It gives us hope. It's a wonderful book. So he has a new book coming out called Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. So look for that. And as Alaskans on the heartbreaking leading edge of the climate crisis, I think we are all hungry and eager to hear about solutions. And so we have one of our finest proponents with us tonight. We are delighted. Please help me welcome Paul Hawken.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Libby. What an amazing, fantastic woman and activist and doer and coalescer. So thank you so much for bringing me here to Anchorage. And I also want to thank Colleen and Courtney, whom you can't see, who are signing tonight. And I promise not to use polysyllabic words wherever possible. And I grew up around all my friends, almost all in Berkeley when I grew up. Were next to it was called Deaf and Dumb School. Excuse me, it's politically incorrect to say that now, but that's what it was called. And so we learned to sign, and of course it was great, and because my sister and I could send messages with my twin sister, and cheat. And but I promised Colleen that I'll be cool tonight. And so anyway, thank you so much for being here. And this presentation tonight is for students. I'm going to speak to that cohort, if you don't mind. For the rest of us like me who are past student age, I hope you enjoy it as well. It's a little different than the presentation I gave today at the Alaska Forum for the Environment, but it's the same material. It's about Drawdown. And the reason I want to give it to students is because I feel like students, frankly, this cohort, this generation, and the title of the forthcoming book, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, includes all of us. But we really do have one generation to go if we continue business as usual. And so therefore, that book emerged out of Greta Thunberg and the Climate Fridays for the Future, Sunrise Movement, and she is writing the foreword to this book, Greta Thunberg. So precisely in order to do what she's doing, but also to respond to what Libby was saying about what to do. And it's what I hear all over the world, everywhere I go. And I even heard it from my own wife, who said, if this book doesn't tell me what to do, I'm leaving you. So that was, got it. And I'm hard at work. But let's talk about Drawdown first. The question, the book emerged from the same question I think we have today, but this is in 2001. And in 2001, the third assessment of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came out, and I read it, the summary, and inhaled, and as did many. And at that time, there came out of Princeton the Carbon Mitigation Project. And digression, please never use the word mitigation again, talking about climate. I think they meant militation project. Mitigation is about reducing the pain of something. We're not going to reduce the pain by slowing down. That's not going to happen. So carbon mitigation is just such a limp word compared to the task at hand and so forth. But the Carbon Mitigation Project came out of Princeton, and everybody was like, yeah, Sokolow and Pakaloa came out, these amazing professors. They had done this study where they showed how we could stabilize emissions by 2050. And I think, as you remember, there was the global wedges. That was a very popular term at that time. We have these 7 wedges, and they're made of 15 aggregate solutions. And if we did different combinations of the solutions, we could reach stabilization by 2050. And I was pretty excited about that. And so I read it and was appalled. I couldn't believe that it passed muster, or that people were thinking it was a solution or a group of solutions. Why? 11 of those 15 solutions could only be implemented by large multinational corporations, 8 of which had to be energy companies, coal, gas, and oil. The 9th one had to be utilities. The 10th one had to be a car company. And the 11th one had to be an appliance company. And maybe with the exception of the appliance company, but those companies are the most conservative companies in the world. And so what they were saying is the boards of directors of those companies would have to breach their fiduciary responsibility to implement those things, because every single solution was deeply underwater financially. And there's only 1.5 things that you and I could do, which is drive less and put a solar panel on our garage or roof. That was it. There was no agency. What I mean by that is, okay, solar panel, but what about families? What about neighborhoods? What about communities? What about institutions? What about buildings and grounds? What about villages? What about small companies, medium-sized companies, other companies? What about farmers? What about ranchers? What about states? What about provinces? What about, all those were left out. And so in a sense, we set up something then, I think inadvertently, which is like, I hope they do it. And after that time, people who, like Al Gore, for whom I have tremendous respect, and others were saying the solution is solar, 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 wind, solar, and recently Elon Musk. That if we get those 3, we get a hall pass to the 22nd century. The problem with that is, first of all, that it's not true. And we have to do those things, no question about it. Stop combusting fossil fuels. 66% of global emissions come from combustion of fossil fuels, so there's no question about that. But the other problem with that is it's still a they. In other words, we're saying, well, I hope they do it. Yes, I agree. And she put a heart on my hand, by the way. You can only see with her electric little thing. And so again, what it made people is, in a sense, spectators or hopers, or and then who are they anyway? And it separated us, and it put us in. It's a disempowering thing to believe or think that there's a they out there that if they don't act in a certain way, that we're going to be in big trouble. Not just big trouble, like the trouble of all troubles, the end of civilization. So at that time, 2 things happened. One, I went around to NGOs, big ones, like, NRDC and Woof Woof and let's see, Earth First, not Earth First, I forget another one that David Brower was involved with, the Sierra Club. And these are friends, and I said we should really map, measure, model the top solutions, the most substantive solutions. And furthermore, we should name the goal. And this is really critically important, because if you don't name the goal, you don't have a chance of hitting it. And combating, tackling, mitigating these things, climate change, we're going to tackle it, we're going to fight it, those verbs are not goals. I'm an English major. I confess I'm not a scientist. You need a noun for a goal. And so I wanted to name the goal, which is drawdown. And what that means is the first time on a year-to-year basis where greenhouse gases peak and go down. And that's our goal. If you're going the wrong way, stop first, and then go back where you came from, right? And we're going over a cliff about very soon. And so again, then and much more now, let's name the goal. So that was Drawdown. And this is where we stand, so to speak. This is the jagged lines you see are CO2 levels measured from the Vostok ice core going back 400,000 years. And as you can see, they don't exceed 280 ppm during that time, and actually a long time before that as well. And then you see the 1950 level where for the first time it exceeded 280. And then what we're told is that it's 400, we're told it's 412, 13, but it goes up and down, but this says 416 ppm. But that measures only CO2. That's from the Mauna Loa Observatory, and it's a good measurement. The problem is that it doesn't include all the other greenhouse gases. And so this number is from NOAA, okay, U.S. government. It's still a number that hasn't been suppressed by the Trump administration. And this includes methane, nitrous oxides, CFCs, SF6, all the other greenhouse gases, not all of them, but virtually all of them. And so in CO2 equivalents, where we are right now is 496 ppm, which is the highest in at least over 25 million years. And we are on Terra Nova, that is to say the new Earth. That is to say anybody who says they know right now, we can listen to that person, but they don't know, because no one knows the world we're on right now and what's going to happen. And I also want to say, as a prefatory comment to what I'm sharing with you, is anything I share that's useful to you, fantastic, I'm pleased. If it's not, just toss it away. I'm not here as an authority. I'm here as one of you, as somebody who is deeply interested and curious about it, and I want to know what I can do, not just, what all of us can do, but what I can do myself, and then what my family can do, and what my friends can do, what my community can do. We're all alike in that way. We want to know. And so, as I said, I hope it's helpful, and if it's not, I understand. What you see here are students. As I said, I went around asking people if they would, actually colleges and institutions as well as NGOs, if they would map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming, and they all said, great idea, we don't do that. And they asked me they said, well, why don't you do it? I said, if I knew how to do it, I wouldn't be asking you. And so it went for years, and I forgot about it until 2013. And in 2013, Bill McKibben wrote a piece called Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. And I think some of you might have seen it in Rolling Stone in July of that year. And what he had done is take the work of Mark Campanale in London. And Mark was a financial analyst for 20 years, I think, before he moved over to the nonprofit side. And he created an organization called Carbon Tracker, which is exactly what it does. And he analyzed the available balance sheets of every coal, gas, and oil company in the world. Not all of them are available. But even with the ones he could get, which is most of them, he came up with the term called unburnable carbon. What he was saying is that the assets on the balance sheets of these energy companies actually was not burnable, or if we did burn it, we would be Venus, so therefore they're not assets. Which is sort of embarrassing to a company that is a multi-billion-dollar energy company, and somebody says, no, you're not. And that's even more true today, of course, than 2013. And what Bill did in his article is he set a match to it anyway, and he burned it. And that's why it was terrifying new math, which is this carbon, which is being planned to be burned, and companies, for goodness sake, are still doing new exploration for gas and oil, being financed by banks that you probably bank at, by the way, or, and insurance companies that probably carry your policy, and such are giving money, loaning money to corporations that are basically trying to discover more oil and gas, not so much coal anymore, except in Australia. And so when that came out, people came to me and said it was game over. and these are activists. These are smart, intelligent, brilliant people who had done really great work in the world and were doing great work. And basically, they said, we're going to move to Canada or Alaska. We're getting out of here. We're going north, take the kids, move to the Squamish Valley or whatever. In other words, they were giving up. And I had forgotten about Drawdown, not forgotten about it, but just put it aside since nobody was interested. And I felt that when this arose, that when we surrender, and maybe we've all had that experience in our lives in some way where we just give up, like, there is an opening. It's actually an opening. It's you hear it all the time in AA. I didn't have that problem, but nevertheless, for my AA friends, is that they had to surrender, that they were helpless. They're helpless. And so in a way, I felt like that was an opening for a Drawdown. And the reason you see the slide you do now is because I still didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to measure and model the most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. And so what we did, there was a small staff of 3 people, and we went out and we posted for Drawdown research fellows all over the world. And these are some of them. These are more. And from 6 continents and 21 countries, we got about 70 research fellows that winnowed down to 60. And basically, they would choose a solution and research it, and we created a model. And we teach them how to model. And so it was a great relationship. We used Zoom.net a lot. It would sometimes be on 24/7 because we'd be in 17 different time zones. And you could go on at 2 a.m. in the morning and people would be talking about stuff. And so it was a community. And they were half PhDs, there was postdocs, almost half women. We didn't choose by gender, just it was a meritocracy. And we had senior fellows. And we began to, step by step, assemble the data, and we had 3 criteria for the solutions. One is the solution had to be scaling already. In other words, it wasn't a pie in the sky or if only. We're doing it. We know how to do it. It's W. Granger. The second thing, it had to have extensive peer-reviewed science. Extensive, not just one paper. And the third thing, it had to have robust economic data from the International Energy Agency or Bloomberg Energy or the World Bank, or actually and so that we could also show the economic impact. Because what we did then is take these solutions and scale them for 30 years in a rigorous but reasonable way to see what their impact would be and whether we could, in fact, with the solutions that we have at hand, achieve Drawdown by 2050. So that was the purpose of Project Drawdown. And away we went. And I mentioned something earlier today which I want to repeat, but it was during that time that the COP21 in Paris occurred, and we had staff there who lived closer to Paris than we did. And we began to understand that we all had a bias. We all thought we knew what the top solutions were to reversing global warming. We were sure of it, in fact. And but by 2015, we began to realize that we didn't. That we didn't know what they were, but we realized that we didn't know what they were. Okay, and so in Paris, the staff went around talking to people and asking, even Al Gore, but all these delegates and different people from NGOs and government, and what were the top 10 solutions to reversing global warming? Nobody could name 10. We didn't ask them to name it in order. Just name 10. Name the top 10. So you had 30,000 people at the Conference of the Parties to discuss, basically, the Paris Agreement, to deal with the most serious, gnarly crisis humanity has ever faced and may ever face. And nobody knew or could name the top 10 solutions. Don't ask me why that's true, by the way. I have no idea. But that's what we discovered. And so people say, why did we do a drawdown? We did it because no one had done it. That's really the long and short of it, because nobody had done it before. And you can Google the top badminton players in the world, and you'll get an answer in less than a second on Google. Boom. Top 10 anything. Try it tonight. Top 10 chefs. Top 10 this. Top 10 that. Top 10 solutions. I did. Union of Concerned Scientists said basically wash in cold water. Put a power strip in your home entertainment center. I'm not kidding. This is a Union of Concerned Scientists. I mean, you had lists from Scientific American and UCS that were like proverbs. Eat smart. For sure. I expected to say love your mother. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, they were proverbial, and unless you had an IQ lower than room temperature, you look at these lists and you go, we're screwed. These are so inadequate to the task at hand. In a sense, what they're saying to us as individuals, that there's not much you could do, right? And they certainly weren't the top 10. They were just pulled out of thin air. And so that's what we did. And so, as I said, we mapped, measured, and modeled. And we did not know what the top solutions would be, or the top 10 or whatever. And I'm not going to say that's that important, because they, who cares in a way, but there's the 80-20 rule sort of applies to impact. But we didn't know until 2 months before this book was published, okay? And the reason we didn't know is because we did all the layout design. And I did edit the book. I also wrote most of it. And the reason it says editor is because the writing I did was based on these 10,000 word theses that were done by the research fellows. Amazing, almost master's theses. And I did try to make it into something that was readable, and the theses weren't very readable, but they were good. I mean, they were written in academies, and they were students and so forth. But I also want to share, before I just go over the solutions, one thing. So there's principles that inform this book. And the principles were the title and subtitle had to have the problem and solution. Okay? And the corollary to that was that we always put problems in the context of solutions. Always. Not like, oh, we have a problem. We have a problem. This is terrible. This is getting worse. Okay, good science. But always put that in the context of possibility instead of what is probable. And that's what the climate movement has done for so long, is emphasize the probability of what's going to go wrong and how it's getting worse sooner than we thought it was going to go wrong. And what does that do? What does that do to people? It just shuts us down. We can accept it as science and as truthful, as factful, but it goes right to our amygdala, shuts down the prefrontal cortex, basically, which is the problem-solving, beautiful part of the, brain of Homo sapiens sapiens, is our prefrontal cortex. It just shuts it down. And so, second thing is we collaborate, as you saw, as you see. And no more sage on the stage, no more charismatic white male vertebrates saying, listen, I got the answer, listen up, okay? It's over, done, finished, And I may sound like that right now, but I'm not meaning that way. I did create it, I did found it, and it was my idea to begin with, but it is collaborative. And there was 228 people involved with it at the end, in terms of advisors, in terms of obviously directors, but also in terms of research scientists. And it's an amazing, amazing group of people, and they continue today. The third thing we didn't do, and this surprised you, we didn't advocate. We didn't tell you what you should, must, or ought to do, because that makes people feel guilty. What we gave is possibility and show. So what we tried to do is create spaciousness for human beings, because there's been no spaciousness around climate. It's been an imperative. It's been fear-based. And the next thing we did, we didn't use fear. We didn't use threat. We didn't use doom as a means to motivate, because it doesn't work. Anyway, and people do it better. David Wells Wallace did it really well. People do it much better than me. And so we didn't need to do it at all. Okay? And the other thing, again, no blame, shame, or finger pointing. We didn't make other people wrong. And we didn't say we were right. In the introduction it says, we hope it's I wrote it. I hope it's approximately right. So again, so you can make up your own mind, not us saying, listen, we know. Yeah, did we do our homework? Is there 7,000 citations behind the work? Yes, there is. But that doesn't mean we're right. And so the next thing we did is we didn't create a them-us division. We didn't other. And othering is really the source of so much confusion around the climate movement, because we use the words like mitigating, fighting, combating, tackling, these war and sports metaphors, that come from men, frankly. And about climate, we're going to tackle climate, right? We're going to tackle climate change. We're going to combat it. We're going to beat it. We're going to fight it, and so forth. Come on. First of all, climate is supposed to change every nanosecond. It's sacred. It's mysterious. It's incredible. And if it didn't change, we wouldn't be here. So we have to give thanks for it, gratitude for change. Now, is it getting warmer? You bet it is. Is it affecting the earth? You bet. Is it affecting the jet stream? Absolutely, and so forth. But climate is doing its job perfectly. It's perfect the way it is. What's not perfect is our relationship to the biosphere and the atmosphere. That is what's the problem. So this idea that, that we can fight it, that idea that there's an it out there is the psychological problem of Western man. Okay? No such thing. It's inseparable. You cannot separate, this, which you feel right now is air, it's the atmosphere. Anything you can't see is the atmosphere. And it is so beautifully, intricately involved with everything we do, everything that lives on, water, land, sea, animals, creatures, everything. It's interacting with it all the time. And so we don't do that. But it's science-based. We use science, absolutely. But we didn't try to put in your face the science. And what I mean by that, we told stories and we didn't try to impress you with jargon. Even CO2, I spelled it out every time, carbon dioxide. Just so you didn't see, NO2, CO2. You didn't see these chemical symbols, And again, to try to create openness and so forth. And lastly, the last two things, we had many voices. Michael Pollan, Janine Benyus, Andrea Wolf, Pope Francis. So we had many voices in there as well, essays that were germane to Drawdown. And lastly, we tried to make it beautiful. That is, so that you want to turn the page. And it's taught from 4th grade and every grade, up from 4th grade in the United States, all the way to MIT Graduate School, Stanford Graduate School, Berkeley. And it's in 15 languages, and a recent news flash is that the second biggest hotel in New Zealand put it in every hotel room with the Gideon Bible. So, cool guy. I don't know who he was. So the first 4 solutions, again, are really about First Peoples, Indigenous peoples. And the reason for that is I feel like by emphasizing renewable energy, which is understandable and crucial, without that, we've overlooked so much. And again, this one isn't even modeled in terms of where it ranks. I think it was 38, but I took it off for this one. What matters is how much carbon in the biomass in the soil upon which the Kayapo Indian, in this case, in Peru and Brazil, are basically stewards of. And that is, and this is CO2 equivalent, that's a heck of a lot of carbon, And of course, we have, cattle ranchers from Bolsonaro and Brazil burning these sacred lands and so forth. And this is British Columbia. This is the Great Bear Forest, the Kermode bear, the sacred bear. These were actually indigenous lands too. So let's be real. The Haisla, the Haida. I mean, there's so many tribes here, and still, by the way. But and there's that number is just extraordinary. And then you have tropical proforestation. By the way, it doesn't say protection. Proforestation. The most important thing we can do with trees is to protect our forests. And there was a science for some time said, mature primary forests don't sequester carbon. They have found out it's the other way around. They sequester more carbon per hectare than do afforestation or new forestation when you plant trees. And then tropical trees. staple crop trees in Africa. These have all been placed there or nurtured there or cared for by tribes and indigenous cultures there. From baobab to marula to so many, and the amount of food that is produced for them is extraordinary. The number one solution was, as I said, well, I don't think I said it, I'll say it now, it was such a surprise to us. We didn't hit the total button until 2 months before. We didn't know what the top 10 were because it was a vector model, and so we really didn't know. We hit it and we go, oh no, it's it's refrigerants. And it's like, oh, it can't be. So we went back and checked the math over and over and over again. We need something more sexy than that, you know. And we couldn't find it. And I had to stick to our math. And so and I said, okay, who's going to write the press release? So we just skipped that one. And this is the number 2 solution, which is, of course, not a surprise at all, for especially here in Alaska, which is the best Class 7 wind area in all of North America. You have it right here. I digress a little bit. I was listening to presentations earlier with Libby and amazing stuff, and I thought, gosh, you know, you have so much wind energy here, you could be making hydrogen and shipping it down to to the other lower 48. You really could. I mean, and we're going to go to a green hydrogen world. That's absolutely no question about it. You have this amazing amount of power here, and you can do the same thing you're doing now. You're shipping oil and natural gas down to the lower 48. You could be shipping green hydrogen. So Alaska can make an amazing transition that would actually not really take away from the no-tax haven that it is today, which has some downsides. Anyway, here's a reduced food waste. Number 3 solution, 40% of the food in the United States is thrown away. And some at the farm level, a lot at the store level, on the restaurant level, at home level. Refrigerators in United States are where food goes to die, as you know. Like, and but it's not just carbon, you know. And we did not measure food that has been landfilled that creates methane emissions because we didn't have the data. You add that in, and this goes way, way up. So I'll stop there. I could talk about it. This is plant-rich diet number 4. Again, we just didn't know how these would sort out. Number 4 means reducing protein down to a healthy level. It doesn't mean vegan. Please do if you wish. Or vegetarian or omnivore. It means reducing protein to about 50-55 grams instead of 100-110 grams, which is unhealthy unless you're a super athlete. And but it means also try to supplement, try to use plant-based protein for sure. Move some of that away from animals and certainly from CAFOs, confined area feeding operations, which are just a disaster for the land, for water, for the animals, and for people. And this is women smallholders. Women are, I'll just say it, women produce more food in this world than all of industrial ag put together. Who knew? It's in FAO. It's been there for decades. And if they get the support that men get, smallholders is 2 hectares or less, by the way, as defined, and 5 acres, they outproduce men by 20% if they get the same tools and seeds and training. And so that's a solution because it's a whole lot more food without having to cut forests. There's another myth around, which you hear again and again, especially from the big industrial ag companies. If you don't let us loose, you know, and do what we do well, which is take soil and a living system and turn it into dirt with chemicals. If you don't let us do that, we won't feed the world. Well, this is so upside down and backwards. I mean, 80+% of all the food we produce goes into animals, into CAFOs. 97% of the soybeans grown in Brazil go to pigs. Hello? What are we doing? I mean, and so we have so much land. We have so much land that we make ethanol in Iowa and burn it, right? We have plenty of land. And if we shift what we produce and how we eat and so forth, we have land that we can convert to so many other uses that can sequester CO2. This is improved rice cultivation, 2 ways to reduce methane emissions. This is offshore wind. If you combine with the onshore wind, it would be the #1 solution. Walkable cities. This is the hometown of my wife, Buenos Aires. This is rooftop solar, and you notice I don't show a 3-car garage in Atlanta with their 6 kilowatt array of solar panels from a drone. This is a woman, an Uros woman, Lake Titicaca, in her Tortola straw hut and island, and she's smiling because she used kerosene to light up her home at night so her children could study. And that smile is about, she's become a much better mother. I mean, not that she wasn't great to begin with, but I'm just saying in terms of protecting her children. And it underlines a point that if you look at Drawdown, and I'm not saying you have to buy it, but just page through it, look at it, go online, you can see all the solutions and descriptions. The fact is that except for maybe one solution, nuclear, which I think is a really crazy way to boil water, I think that all those solutions improve so many different things. They're so beneficial for water, for children, for jobs, for prosperity, for health. It just goes on and on and on. In other words, we should be doing them if we didn't know anything about climate change or extreme weather. We would want to be doing all of these solutions because they make so much sense on all levels. This is bike infrastructure. We're talking about that today. It's like, you know, you ride bikes where you're safe. If you don't make an infrastructure, bikes aren't going to happen. This is tree intercropping, this is Oregon, which is peaches and corn. It sequesters more carbon and is more productive. This is geothermal, easily understood. This is electric bikes. This is the guy in Berlin who makes them. This is called many things. I'm calling it graze and go, but it's called ecological grazing or holistic resource management. There's also arguments of what to call it. I think graze and go sounds kind of cool. But basically, it's animals imitating what ruminants always did, which is to herd, to protect themselves from predators and keep moving. Nobody wants to really eat all day long where you've pooped and peed, and they're the same, okay? And so they eat and go, eat and go, eat and go. So they don't really come back to the same place for 6 months or 12 months when they're free range, when they're in the savannah, when they're in the Serengeti, when they were in the Buffalo Common. And so basically ranchers who imitate this by sectoring off their ranch with electric wires, electric fencing, basically get not only they can double and triple and quadruple their stocking rate, that is the number of cattle or sheep they have on their land, and their percolation rate, the rate at which water is absorbed by the land, goes up by 10, 20, 30 times. You get more productivity in terms of the amount of grass, because if you chomp a perennial once, and basically chomp it and then move, it just sends all these signals, hormones actually, to the roots, and the roots go down deeper, which means next year the plant is even stronger than it was before. If you leave the cattle on the land and they just keep nibbling and nibbling and nibbling, pretty soon those annuals and perennials just give up. And the seeds sprout again the next year as annuals, but you're degrading it. This is farmland restoration. I mean, there is at least between 1 and 2 billion acres of land that's been abandoned, farmland abandoned, because it got played out. And it's an incredible opportunity to regenerate and to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. Clean cook stoves, carbon black, which is not really a greenhouse gas, but this is about not only preventing that from going into the air, but also for women's safety, so they don't have to go miles and miles from their home to get wood. This is silver pasture, the number 9 solution. How many had ever heard about it before? It's been around for over 3,000 years. it's ruminants and trees together. And it's amazing what it does to the soil, what it does to, again, drawdown, carbon sequestration. It's quite extraordinary. And coastal wetlands, again, I'll just go through these quickly. Educating girls, number 6. I want, this is a surprise to some people. It really shouldn't be, but it is. And basically we know that if you support girls, there's 145 million girls who are taken out of school before they reach high school age and you know, in the world today. And if they're supported to achieve what would be a high school equivalent education, they have an average of 2+ children. If they're not, if they're pulled out of school for early marriage or to go to work to put their brothers through school, they have an average of 5+ children. But they don't earn as much. The health outcomes for her are troubling because she's having babies at such a young age. The children's health outcomes are not good because of lack of money and habitat, etc. The kids oftentimes don't go to school or leave school early. In both cases, if the woman has 2 children and she's educated, she has more resources, she puts them into her sons and daughters, they imitate their mother's behavior. So you get a virtuous circle or you get a vicious cycle. And it all goes right down to supporting that girl to get an education. And I made this very clear in talk at UC Santa Cruz, and a professor raised his hand and said, yeah, okay, great, but at the end of the talk, you know, said, how do we control population? That's the number one thing. How do we control it? He was very, you know, and I thought, did you hear my talk? Apparently not. Anyway, I said, lose the verb, control. The verb is empower. And if you take the number 7 solution, which I don't think I have here, but is family planning. That is access worldwide, including the United States, by the way, for women to basically be supportive in their reproductive choices, health and well-being. Then you put those two together, and the number 1 solution to reversing global warming is the empowerment of girls and women. That's number 1. And we know that from the UN. It's the difference between the high and median population numbers in 2050. Again, all our data, by the way, we're just a mirror. We are not deriving this information or coming up with conclusions. You know, Drawdown is a mirror to the world to reflect back to the world what it does and what it knows. Right? Really important. You know, again, we're not experts. We all are experts in different areas. There's so much expertise and knowledge and concern. And in a sense, it was never brought up to be seen in this case, a single volume. There's more to be seen, but humanity had never done that before. And of course, now is the time. Coming attractions were just solutions that we couldn't model. There wasn't peer-reviewed science, but there's science. And this is go to Yale on this one. These are CLTs, or mass timber. Mass timber buildings are being built all over the world. There's 2 98 and 99-story buildings permitted in London and Tokyo. And no concrete, no steel. Steel and concrete are 11% of global emissions, those two alone. And they're more fireproof than steel and concrete buildings. And you say, no. It's so counterintuitive, right? But Yale done the study. The thing about mass timber or CLT buildings, cross-laminated timber, is they actually don't burn. They char and they stop. The char stops the fire, so they don't keep burning. And that's why they're more fireproof. And cities like forests. And one of the things that came out today too, and I want to share with you, is that we need bigger goals. And one of our goals for all cities should be to make them like a forest. And what a forest means that it's a sink instead of a source. In other words, it's drawing carbon in. It's bringing carbon in from the atmosphere, not emitting it. And as cities, there's various estimates about how much of emissions come from cities, all the way up to 40%, depending how you measure it. But this is happening in China. These kind of buildings are being built. And when you combine them with mass timber, the effects are quite extraordinary. There's no reason our cities have to be carbon emitters. No reason at all. This is a design problem and a design opportunity, and it's a much quieter, nicer, better city to live in, walk in, bike in than the cities we have designed so far. And this last one, a cow walks onto a beach. It does sound like one of those jokes, right? You know, something walks into a bar, right? You know, like a panda, panda bear. You remember that one? Anyway, but it is a really interesting solution because it came out of Prince Edward Island, and this is not Prince Edward Island, as you can tell. And a farmer just noticed it's such a small island that almost every farm borders on the coast or the sea. And he noticed these dairy cows that ate kelp produce more milk. And like, well, but why? And then he asked the county agent why. He said, I don't know. He got a scientist, and the scientist said, well, it's probably because the cows are eating kelp are not producing as much methane. And because methane is a very inefficient metabolic process in a ruminant, and so they tested it. They split the herd, and some kelp, some no kelp, and put these things over their head to measure enteric emissions. They're where most of the methane comes from, and sure enough. But at that point, it's a science project. It's like interesting, publish, do it, but it's inapplicable. And but that scientist in Canada started to work with a scientist in Australia who had the same data, and they found a marine algae called Asparagopsis taxiformis, which is abundant in the Indian Ocean, tropical oceans, that have fed in 2.5% amounts to ruminants, goats, sheep, and cattle, reduces methane emissions from 50 to 90%. And they are the source of, again, there's so many estimates, you know, but 8 to 14% of emissions come from our love of hamburgers. And not that we should continue that love because of this, but I'm just saying this is really meant to give the reader, in this case, there's 20 of these coming attractions, a sense that humanity is on the case. We're on it. We're not just saying, okay, well, let's put up solar panels. That there's a tremendous amount of imagination and innovation and technology coming. I could go on and on for an hour about solutions that you probably or most certainly have never heard of that are emergent right now. And the only reason I know them is because that's what I do every day, all day long. And so, but of the top 20 solutions, 12 were land-based or food, which is really about land as well. And again, we did not see this coming at all. And we just did the math. That's what we did. We, you know, the motto is "In God We Trust, All Others Bring Data." You know, I mean, and we just used data and showed you where we got the data, and that's what the data said. And this is looking at a pie chart, and the only thing I want to emphasize here is that your eye tends to go to the big pie wedges, and we all are the same. But there's no such thing as a small solution. Really, really important to understand. This is a pie wedge, okay? This is but it's a system. It's the whole system. That's how we modeled it. It's a whole system that created the problem, and it's a system that will heal and cure it, you know. So you're a system. Your body is an amazing, complex system, just like civilization is, you know. And do you have something small like you don't want to have anymore, like your thyroid gland? Just take it as too small, not important. It's the same with this. It's all important, all of it. And yes, some have much greater impact than others, but so here's the book. The couple things about it was that the subtitle was suggested by an intern from Stanford who was working at Penguin for my editor, and he sent it in as really for the back of the book, actually not for the subtitle. And I said, no, 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 that's so brash and cheeky. We never, no, 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 this is not a plan. And I was actually almost offended by it. But I left it somehow. I left it on my desk. I left it sort of like a piece of paper on my desk. And I kept looking at it every day. That the most comprehensive plan ever proposed. And one day I realized that actually it's true. It was true. Now, when I say plan, it's not our plan, not like Project Drawdown's plan. It was like remember I said we're reflecting back to the world what it knows and what it's doing. What I'm saying is the world, in a way, does have a collective plan. Okay, is it adequate to the task at hand given the new science? No. Okay, but we do. And the reason we could say it was the most comprehensive plan is simple, because nobody had ever proposed a plan. So we could say most nuanced, most poetic plan, most, we could use any adjective we wanted because it would be true. And it's not that we don't want more plans, we do, but I'm just saying we were the first one to propose a plan. This last thing, as I said, the book is taught, but it's also used in theater. This is the Up in the Air Theater at the University of Colorado. And the kids there act out the solutions. They have plays, and they have many acts in these plays. And they have top 10 solutions. This is one of the top 10 plays. And this is solution number 4. And this is peas and carrots, talking about plant-rich diet. and I show it as the last slide because I feel like we have to communicate in a different way. We have to communicate in a way that brings people joyously to it. It's not, don't feel guilty. Never feel guilty about what you do, ever, ever, ever. The only reason to do this is because you love this world. Do it out of love. This is what we're talking about here. Do it from our heart. Do it from love. Do it because we light up to do what's needed to be done. There's no other way it's going to succeed unless we do it from that point of view. It's not because we screwed up. That's the past. Who cares? It's not about making other people wrong. Who cares? What matters now is who we are, right? And I mean, we have been brought together. I mean, global warming is a global commons. It's connecting all of us. And we better start acting that way. And the way you act that way is not to be right, but to listen, not to know, but to respect, and it doesn't mean you don't act at all. It means definitely acting. And in the new book, Regeneration, I wrote a sentence. I wrote it in, I don't know how many writers are here, but sometimes you write something. I've written paragraphs, then I go read the paragraph, and I say, I never had these thoughts. No, seriously. I mean, I've done 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I go back, because I'm the kind of go, write, edit, write, edit, write, edit. Some people don't do that. So they just write and write and write. I write and edit, and I go back and go, it's all new to me, what I just wrote. And I kind of like it, but it wasn't, I think I'll keep it. It's just the weirdest, wonderful experience, but I wrote something that said, the person who's reading this sentence is the person who can head off global warming. That's who can. And I looked at that and I said, what was I thinking? And I think what I was thinking, because we've been so disempowered, like, there's nothing I can do, gosh, And we've been so they'd, like they have to do it, our administration and the Congress and so forth, that we forgot that all change arises from one person. All disease arises from a single cell. All disease. And then 2 and 4 and 8 and 16, 32, 64. And all movements, all change happens because of one person who becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. And the example that you know of is Greta Thunberg, okay, who sat in August 8th, 2018 in front of her school and made a scrawled sign, I think on cardboard, and basically said, I'm on strike, I'm on climate strike, because you're teaching me about a world that will never exist. I won't live in that world because it won't be here. And 14 months later, we had the largest climate march in history because of that sign. But we didn't do it because Greta catalyzed it alone. Yes, she did. But why did it speak to 10, 11, 12, 13, 9-year-olds, 14-year-olds everywhere in the world, or certainly in North America and Europe? Because they'd studied it at school. They knew. So we are in that same situation where I think all of you, or many of you, depending on your age, have felt like, I've been working away on this, working away, it's a slog, and so forth. But we, I think, are reaching what could be called a critical mass. And that's what happened, why we had the largest climate march. And a critical mass where I think it's going to flip. And the climate movement, whatever it's going to be called, Lord knows it won't be called that, will be the largest movement in the history of humankind. No question about it. And as if you said, what are the odds that we will achieve what we have to achieve, a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and another 50% by 2040, I give you, it's terrible odds if you look from where we are right now. But there's something in us that is extraordinary, that can be catalyzed, that can change overnight. If you've ever seen a group of starlings, if you haven't, go on YouTube and watch them. You know, it's so beautiful. They all change direction at the same moment. Well, how? Who's it communicating? How do they know? We don't know how birds do that. We don't even know how they flock that way. We're the same. We're amazing human beings. Anyway, I do want to acknowledge all the people in Fairbanks and Juneau and all the rest parts of Alaska. Thank you for being here tonight. They were able to, I think, email questions in. I don't know if they did. I don't know, I guess if Libby announced that. But anyway, we now have time for question and answer. And there's a very handsome young man with a microphone who will come to you if you raise your hand, or at least hand you the microphone. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank you. Thanks. How's it going?
So, the handsome man will take the microphone around. I did text and email to the people in October, but if anybody else is listening from a distance, the email address is Chavez Jr., Luis's email address, lchabezjr@alaska.edu. You can send him in questions and we will respond.
Okay.
That way.
All right. So if you have a question, you just raise your hand. I'll repeat the question if people didn't hear it. If you didn't get a microphone, there's a microphone. Here's a question.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much. This is really good, and I have your book, and I've read it. The question that I have comes from an activist point of view in terms of how we influence our politicians. So we know everything that we read says we have no time, yet all these candidates and politicians say we have to wean ourselves off of oil and gas. It seems like we have no time to do this. There's a big, huge disconnect. How do we change that?
That's the question I've been asking myself, by the way. So, and that's why Regeneration is being written. And as I said, if it doesn't tell us what to do, then the book is a failure. What to do includes exactly that, though. It includes policy and how to engage, influence, and change, on different levels of governance, too, from cities to counties to states to countries and so forth. And CCL is here, And CCL has been working tirelessly for I don't know how many years to get a carbon tax instituted in the United States, and now they're worldwide. And there is legislation up, the Energy Innovation Act, which is a fee and dividend tax, which is that there's a carbon tax and it's rebated per capita evenly, so poor people actually make money on it and rich people pay so it's very progressive as a tax in that sense. This is a 30-year-old idea, by the way. This is not a new idea, but look how long it's taken to it. I don't know if it'll pass this Congress, but it's going to pass soon. You can just feel it. Like, sometimes something has to come up and be rejected first, and then it's, but it may. I don't know. It's got bipartisan support. I don't know if it has enough bipartisan support, but it even has oil company support of all things. And so yes, exactly. And the issues that you mentioned were not covered in Drawdown, because I felt that nobody had ever done what we did. And I felt like, let me just stick to this lane and see if we can do it in such a way that nobody does a gotcha, said you got it wrong, or this is wrong, or you have a bias, or you missed a decimal point, or all that sort of stuff. So we were scrupulous about that. That took every single ounce of energy and hours and people and resources we had, because nobody would fund us. And so we didn't have much money. We had a lot of heart, but not much money. And it was really important that we not fail. Regeneration, in my mind, was always the sequel to it. And where it gets into, it's social. It's about social too. So it's two things. It's one about wilding. It's about regenerative agriculture. It's about soil. When you hold a handful of soil, it's the most complex ecosystem in the world, right in your hand. No more complex ecosystem. Not the oceans, not wetland, not a mangrove. It's in your hand. We have no idea what's in our hands when we have a handful of soil. 90% of the organisms, the bacteria, the protozoa, have been unidentified. We don't know what they are. And it is extraordinary. So we have that, and we have oceans and wilding and forests. But then we have food, habitat, and energy. And then we have social, which is about policy, mobilization, organization, about how to get it done. Then we have, in a sense, of what to do by every single agency, which I mentioned earlier. So every single agency. And basically, not to exclude anything, but these are the 7 most important things in order to reduce our impacts by 50% or more in less than 10 years. For individuals, it's a year. Depends on what the entity is. And so you say, how do we do it? I don't know how we do it, but we know what to do. And if we do it, this will be the result. I think the real question is, how will humanity get on board with this? And one way that it won't get on board, and that will be used again and again against this, will be the word sacrifice. Like, you have to make a sacrifice, and that's just not true. I'm a father. I never sacrifice one thing for my child because I love them. Now, did they keep me up at night? Did they come home late? Did they do this and that and so forth? Like, did I want to tear my hair out sometimes? Yeah. But it was never a sacrifice. And every parent here knows that. And so the same thing about this earth and about the future and about our children and about, gray fox and all the beautiful things that live and inhabit and so forth. It's no sacrifice at all. But I don't think humanity will understand that until it feels a pretty strong, firm hand on its back, which is called the weather. And so our ally, perversely or paradoxically, is extreme weather. And that's why you're seeing this. I won't name them. I have CEOs of, I don't have them, but they've come to me from very large companies, not large, very large, in tears in the last 6 months. And they're doing all the right things. Quote, quote, commitments, zero emissions by, whatever date, and this and that and so forth. They've done all the right things, RE100, and I mean, just, they check all the boxes. And they're in tears. And why are they in tears? They're in tears because the penny dropped. Finally, they get it. And they, in this case, they're men, but they're all fathers. And just the grief and it just has come over them. Grief. And I think another reason is because they realize if they do what they are committed to doing as CEO of the XYZ company, that it's not sufficient. And they don't know what to do. So there's something going on, and I hear this everywhere. Literally people who are responsible for billions and billions and billions of dollars have come to me in the last few months, last few weeks even. One entity with $40 billion. They want to mission align. They want to move their money from their portfolio or change their portfolio so that it actually is in alignment with the goals of the SR15 and that we're talking about, the one you're referring to, not enough time. And they don't know what to do. And it's too much money to get through the door. It's so big, And what we need is a lot of small checks, not big, multi-billion-dollar checks, I mean, because there's so many amazing things that need to be done everywhere in the world and so forth. And so we talk about how do we break this big amount of money down to levels where it can actually be absorbed, properly by entities, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, they're philanthropies or family funds, and so forth. And so I'm seeing that at the same time too. The amount of money that is actually lining up to address global warming is extraordinary. And I think people are going to figure it out. I'm not the expert at all. I don't have a fund. Actually, that's true, I do, but it's so tiny. But we're going to figure this out about how to get these big piles and bags of money that are sitting, doing, what is it? I'm going to say the devil's work, and I'm quoting a woman from Guyana, the High Commissioner of British Guyana, saying, they do the devil's work. But I mean, they kind of do. The money is doing it. It's not nobody being devilish. It's just that's what it does, And it does everything that's antithetical to what we need. And I think these family funds are generational changes. There are, like I say, there's just change of heart on levels that I've never seen before, ever since I've been involved with this. So, yeah, that's a good question.
Question up here.
Yeah, from Homer? Any more questions? I mean you want God's name? I can go there. The question was, do you want to repeat the question? Yeah. Well, the first question is, have I engaged leaders of climate-friendly nations? It didn't say in what context. I'm not sure what the context was. Oh, in terms of potential solutions? Okay. And the other thing was, what about corruption? Basically, right? Natural disasters. Yeah. See, first question is, no, I don't consult with any government. Basically, I don't know how to. They don't want to consult with me. Since the book was published, heads of state actually do refer to the book and use it, and so but they haven't called me up that I know of. And so I don't. I'm not a big fan of top-down. Conference of the Parties, preceded by the Kyoto Protocol, has been meeting for 25 years. And in 4- and 5-star hotels in capital cities all over the world, and the atmosphere didn't notice. for 25 years, and basically delegates come and go, governments come and go, commitments are all words. None of that has changed. None of that is real change. The Paris Agreement has only been done by only two nations have met their commitments out of 188 nations who are signers. Two. So, I mean, to me, if we're putting our hope in governments, good or bad, corrupt or uncorrupt, we're putting our love in all the wrong places, because if 25 years isn't enough to show that it's not going to happen, governments are followers, they're not leaders. And I wish it was different. Somebody said, well, why can't we all be like Denmark? And I was like, well, why can't we all be like Denmark? It reminds me of like when I was like an adolescent, and you'd see this picture, or somebody would see this picture of this babe, this Hollywood blonde or whatever, this movie star or whatever, and my friend would say, boy, someday I'm going to get a girlfriend like that. And I said, you're dreaming. It's not going to happen. And this idea that somehow we can be like Denmark, not going to happen, okay? I mean, that's cultural, deep cultural roots that created a Denmark, and we don't have those roots. So really we have to look about the vectors of change from a very different point of view than governance. It doesn't mean that we don't want to influence. It doesn't mean that we don't want to stop corruption. It doesn't mean we keep speaking truth to power. Of course we do. But the idea that somehow that is the lever, it is not the lever. It is not. And if it was, it never happened. It's never happened yet. So I don't know if that answers the question sufficiently, but it's just my personal opinion about when people who are elected and 4 years later they're gone, and they're meeting to discuss the fate of the world. And I just think it's I hope they still keep meeting and doing that. Nothing wrong with it, but I just don't. What's wrong with that to me is the idea that we place our hope and the future in their hands and pray that something will come of it. It's not going to come up. It's not going to happen. That's such a good question. Actually, the number one solution is none of the above. The question is, what is the role of disarmament? And I would say that military-industrial complex and war. I'm going to add to the question in terms of climate change. The number one solution is not on this list at all, and it's because we can't model it. And basically, it's war. And there is, I think, 130 standing armies and 34 militias that are not, not standing armies. They actually don't have a governance. And the worldwide weapons trade is, $1.8 trillion a year. And the biggest exporter of weapons is the United States. And we wonder, and we don't feel safe. Huh, how interesting. I mean, we're selling danger, and then we feel like then we need to arm up even more because of what we've done to the world. But if you could model the impact of war and military, the standing armies that aren't at war and the wars together, it would be the number one cause and solution. Peace would be the number one solution, without question. Without question. And again, it's kind of like women, girls. Why don't we talk about that? I don't know. We could not model it. We needed data. And governments do not give you data on their military. And so, we were, in a sense, hogtied by that absence of data. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm up here in the back.
I see you.
On your left.
I see him. Okay, I see
Oh, yeah, someone else. All right, so thank you so much for organizing this really hopeful project for us. It's very helpful. I have a kind of a technical question. I saw a lot of the numbers for how much carbon equivalence each of these solutions can help with, but I'm not quite sure how that relates to our current emissions. Can you give us an idea on like the whole pie? If it happened, how that would affect
Yeah, in the
climate.
back of the book, there's 3 different scenarios. And the numbers you saw on the slides, you see on the page, is a rigorous but reasonable rate of scaling, okay? And we didn't work backwards from a goal. We worked just to see what would happen if these will all continue to scale in a reasonable way. And we did not achieve drawdown in 2050. Then, and you'll see again in the back of the book, right here is an adjustment onto some of them. In other words, this is what we would need to do to achieve drawdown by 2050. And then we did another one. This is what we would need to do to achieve drawdown by 2045. There's a movie out called 2040, which I think is being released in June by Damon Gameau in Australia. And we did 2040 for him. And actually, it's interesting that as you get closer in time, it almost doesn't get more difficult, because when we model, I geek out a little bit here, but you measure against a business as usual scenario. Okay, so this is what the IEA and IPCC and the World Bank, they have this projection of increased materialization, consumption, oil, gas, wood, whatever, food, for the next 30 years. And so we measured against that. Baked into that is solar, from the IEA. So when you see solar being a little bit lower, like 8 and 10 on ours, the reason for that is because so much solar is already baked into the business as usual scenario. We were measuring against that business as usual scenario, so not, in a sense, creating a new scenario. We were measuring against the conventional wisdom about what was going to happen. And so when you go to 2040, now can you imagine this is 2050, here's 2045, here's 2040, then here's 2030 and 20, well, I may probably have it wrong here in proportion, but the point being, as you go down, to 2040, then actually the intervention in terms of avoided emissions and sequestered emissions is less than by 2050. So in some ways, between 2040 and 2050 is almost the same thing in terms of our ability to stabilize and then reverse emissions at that date. So, but the numbers are in the back in more detail than you may want, but they're there, and they're also on the website. There's a hand here. I don't know how you're ever going to get a microphone, but sure, you got a good voice.
So you said fear isn't really a good motivator. But then you talked about people sort of, their amygdala getting fired up and not really thinking, people like all. And certainly politicians, current politicians use fear very well.
Very well.
When it comes to, motivating people around immigration, etc. So just trying to wonder how do we tap into, how do we change the story? I mean, you mentioned weather being sort of a motivator perhaps, but is there a way to sort of, fear is a big motivator in some respects, actually.
It is. It is.
How can we change the conversation that doesn't have skeptics out there just sort of sitting back and continuing to be skeptical and sort of driving them a little bit?
Well, first of all, I strongly urge you to forget about the deniers and skeptics. That's a waste of time. Okay, they're just confused. So, so you don't want to spend your time trying to convince the confused person that they're confused. It really is. You have better things to do. Okay, number one. Number two. No, there's not. No, there's not. That's corruption. That's not confusion. That's the worst kind of confusion of all, which is thinking that money is more important than ethics, okay? And so we know now that 76% of Americans now think climate is the number one problem, okay? That's a huge change in a year, 2 years, 3 years, okay? So that's who we have to focus on. Second, the reason fear, yes, it's a motivator, but not a motivator to bring people together, not a motivator to solve things, not a motivator to be a collector. I mean, our brain is wired 9 to 1. We're going to respond to fear before something that is positive. And that's, every media knows that, and that's where they light us up every single day. And everybody who writes headlines and does stories and does a hierarchy of them is doing that. You never see a good story, a good news story at the header or the top. The New York Times, Washington Post, you name it, CNN, you never see it. It's all down buried because people don't respond to it. That's because we've evolved that way. We evolved to deal with threat. And so the way to reach people is not to talk about future existential threat, which is what we've been doing for 45 years. Like, in the future, it's going to get really shitty, so we should do something now. The human mind doesn't work that way. The human mind responds to current threat, okay? And you wouldn't be here if your ancestors didn't do a good job. All our ancestors did. That's why we're here tonight. And that's food and warmth and clothing and protection from hostility or whatever, right? And so we then, when you look at how are we going to do this, you do this by addressing current human need, not future existential threat. And if we are not, if we think humanity is not paying attention, it's because we're not paying attention to humanity. And the fact is that unless our solutions address current human need, people have better things to do, which is to take care of their current human needs. And so we have actually kind of blown it in that way. By scientifically, the scientific communication has always been about the future, the future, the future. Sometime in the future this is going to happen. It's not that they were incorrect. It's just that it's inept in terms of communicating to people about why they should care and why should we care about each other. And there is no good story there. And if you don't tell a good story, people aren't going to listen and remember it, right? And so the story here is about taking care of each other, not about the future. We take care of each other in appropriate ways. The future takes care of itself, but it's not the other way around. And so, but again, I urge you to not be, what deniers want is to hook you. And what media wants is to hook you. And go, no, and to go on to tweet it and go back and forth and argue and so forth. Forget all that. We don't have time for that stuff. We have time to act and to do things. And, you know, when we were kids, you know, which sandbox did we play in? We played in the sandbox where people having fun, not where they're hitting each other with Tonka trucks, okay? So we're adults and we're the same way. We're going to go to where people are joyous, where they laugh, where they're celebratory, and they use this time in humanity as a way to express our humanity and our love and our compassion and our reverence and our ability to be humble and listen and enact things on behalf of others. That's where we are right now, in my opinion.
That seems to me like the perfect place to end. That was
it is a perfect place.
A beautiful ending.
Okay.
Please give him another round of applause. We're so
Thank you.
glad we've had Paul with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.